for a date with Cape Town, the Garden Route, and a bit of South Africa. For those who don't know me, I'm Charlie from Putney Travel. We've run a few of these seminars, these travel webinars, but after a summer break, we thought we needed one. We're going to kick off again, and it's a series of our very favourite worldwide destinations. Today, I'm really pleased that we're joined by Steve from South African tourism. South Africa's always been one of Putney Travel's favourite destinations, and it's fair to say that most visitors that we send there will include some time in time in Cape Town and also the surrounding area. I've been lucky enough to visit it on a couple of occasions and always been struck by the fantastic variety in such a small area, quality of the accommodation, the quality of the food and wine, and just the vibrancy of Cape Town itself. Now, I'm going to hand you over to Steve. The presentation's about 30 to 40 minutes. There'll be time to ask questions afterwards, but feel free, if you've got any questions in the meantime, put them on the chat button, which will be on the middle of the middle of the screen there, and I'll try and deal with them as we go along. But in the meantime, over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And thanks everyone for joining us, and for those that are watching on the recording later on as well. As Charlie mentioned, my name's Steve. I work for South African Tourism. You can probably tell by my accent that I'm not British or South African. I've lived in the UK a long time, and I've also worked for South African Tourism for quite some time as well. So don't worry, hopefully I have an idea of what I'm talking about. I've been lucky enough to go to the country 12 times now. So, and quite often when I'm there, I end up spending almost a month at a time. So I've explored all 9 provinces. And I've certainly seen some of the best parts of the Rainbow Nation. So for anyone that has been there, and I know Wawa who's today, you live in Cape Town, which is quite impressive. For anyone else that has been there, hopefully you will learn something today that you haven't seen before or experienced, or you didn't know about the country that you've travelled to. And if you haven't been to South Africa at all, then hopefully this entices you a little bit as well. So working for the Tourism Board, obviously we won't talk too much about specific hotels and specific tours and things like that, because that's what Charlie can obviously book for you and the team at Putney Travel. But I do want to give you a sense of what the country's all about, some of the really cool parts of South Africa. We'll talk about some of the cities. Of course, you can't go to South Africa without talking about Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, driving along the Garden Route, doing a bit of safari, things like that. So we'll tick all of those boxes this evening. Just like all of you, the joys of a Zoom conversation, completely used to it now. You can see, welcome to my bedroom. It's not quite as professional as the office would have been once upon a time, but I am wearing the right logo tonight. And I've also got a in the background on my bed, as you can see. So that's the safari portion covered. And of course, I like to wave the Rainbow Nations flag from time to time. So there you go. I'm still on brand as much as I can be anyway. Just a heads up, there will be a couple of videos this evening as well. I know it does depend on what your internet speed is, whether you can see them properly or not. Don't worry too much if the videos are skipping a little bit and things like that, because whatever's shown in the video, I'll pretty much explain afterwards as well. It's just a nice sort of way to start off, I think, before we get into the nitty-gritties of South Africa. So here we go. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Good night. No, jokes. So when we're talking South Africa, everyone, this is the lovely Republic of South Africa, right on the southern tip of the continent. I'm sure you probably know that already, but you would be surprised. Some people do ask a few questions such as geographical location. So here we are. Now, you can see this is a fun little map. It's obviously not completely to scale, but we like to talk about some of the fun things that people can see around the country. You've got Cape Town just down here, of course, not too far away, the beautiful winelands. You've got the amazing Namaqualand up in the Northern Cape here. Every August and September, you've got beautiful flowers that come out there. And then this section here, this is the very famous garden route. So if you're driving along the garden route, a 10 to 14 day sort of trip is what you look at there. Going up a little bit further, you've got the beautiful Drakensberg Mountains, Hluhluwe Imfolosi National Park. Let's see who can pronounce that later on. That's a World Heritage listed area as well, up in KwaZulu-Natal province. And then you may or may not have heard of Kruger National Park, which is just up in this section here. Kruger's the largest national park in South Africa. It's well over 22,000 square kilometres. So that's about 8,000 square miles. Just to put it in to perspective for the Brits, that's about the same size as Wales. So it's pretty big for a national park there. It's where you can find all the fun things when it comes to safari, the Big Five, as well as a lot of other African wildlife. But it's not the only place for safari, which is a bit of a common misconception. So we'll talk about that a bit later on, but this just gives you a bit of an overview. Now, flying into South Africa, you can do it by land, but it might take a little bit too long. So it's probably best to discuss the airports that you would be flying into. Now, depending on what your airline preference is, also depending on the post-COVID situation, of course, the three main cities to fly into, you've got good old Johannesburg, just here, OR Tambo Airport. It's an 11 to 12 hour flight if you end up doing a direct flight. So British Airways, Virgin, South African Airways, they all do direct flights right out of London as well. They used to be out of Gatwick seasonally, but I don't think that'll continue when everything starts to calm down. But out of Heathrow, at least. And 11 to 12 hours seems like a bit of a long haul flight, of course, but if you think about it like this, it might only be a 6 or 7 hour flight to get over to JFK, for example, if you're going over to the United States, but you're crossing completely different time zones and your body's out of whack for quite some time. The good thing about flying directly south into Johannesburg, or perhaps down into Durban here, or even down into Cape Town, is the sheer fact that once you get there, you'll feel a heck of a lot better than you would if you were flying across the Atlantic Ocean to the other side rather than straight down. And that's because there's only a 2 hour time difference between South Africa and Great Britain. That's just at the moment. When we lose our daylight savings here, they will gain their hour back. So there'll just be a 1 hour time difference down in South Africa. So it makes a heck of a difference when you're getting down there. And it means essentially you can hit the ground running. You're not woozy for a couple of days. And the other interesting thing about the overnight flights is that they are just that. Direct flights are overnight, so it means you can have some sort of sleep. You're not going to have the most amazing sleep on a plane in comparison to your bed, I'm sure, but some sort of sleep at the time that your body's meant to have a sleep, and trust me, it does a world of good. Now, just talking about areas to fly into, a lot of people will fly in and then they'll grab a car and start driving around. Now, we tend to find in all of the surveys that we do, most people coming from the UK, coming from good old London, will actually hire a car and drive along. It's easy, it's safe, it's reliable, and the other really cool thing about driving in South Africa is they drive on the same side of the road as us here in the UK too, which is quite handy. You can also see this little white car just here. So this is the drive along the garden route that I was talking about before. So I'll mention that one. I'll mention it again. It's 10 to 14 days that you would normally take, but that wouldn't just include a straight drive, of course. You'd be going from Cape Town after spending a little bit of time there, heading down to the Cape of Good Hope, perhaps, across to Robben Island, up to Table Mountain, checking out the beautiful Cape Winelands for a day or two as well. You don't want to be driving there because you prefer to be drinking, obviously. There's some fantastic wine in that area. And then continuing along all the way to the Eastern Cape, to our next province here. You don't need to worry too much about the provinces, just the fun places to go, of course. And Addo Elephant Park is one of the many national parks, just like Kruger National Park, where most people will end up finishing their journey if they're driving along the garden route. Another popular driving route, if you've been to South Africa before and you thought, well, I want to go back because it's such a big country and there's so much more to see, then I'd recommend going up and doing the panorama route. This gives you the chance to see Kruger National Park, perhaps to see a little bit of Johannesburg, because it's only a 4-hour drive to get to the Kruger from Johannesburg. It's just to the southern part of the Kruger. There's 11 different gates going in there. Just remember, it's pretty big there, that's for sure. There's also some fantastic cities nearby. And then the panorama route itself won't take anywhere near as long, which is good. 2 or 3 days is all you require. You see a lot of amazing scenery, and it's the perfect opportunity to go back to South Africa if you've already been, or if you'd like to do something completely different and a little bit more off the beaten track, it's another great opportunity as well. Now, I just realized in this presentation, I haven't added another car, but I probably should have, because one of my personal favorite driving routes, you can see where my mouse is, back to where the green plane is, down into Durban there. Durban is the largest city, but it's not the capital of the KwaZulu-Natal province. That's Pietermaritzburg, but a fantastic driving route there. Also takes less time than the garden route, but it takes 6 to 7 days to actually drive around and enjoy. You see amazing places like the beautiful Drakensberg Mountains. You can meander through the Midlands there, which is fantastic farmlands, beautiful shops. They've also got vineyards there, because you don't just have wine down in the Western Cape. You've also got a heck of a lot of history as well. So for anyone that knows their Anglo-Boer War history, Anglo-Zulu War history as well, some of the biggest battles in South African history occurred around these areas. It's collectively known as the battlefields, and you can go on 2 of those regions there. And then, of course, you can continue on to that lovely name that I pronounced before. It's a Zulu name, Hluhluwe Imfolosi National Park. World Heritage listed, beautiful wetlands area. You've got hippos around there, as well as the big 5 and lots of other animals as well. Now, I should probably talk about COVID levels, the alert levels. What do they mean? What's happening there? At the moment, South Africa has just hit alert level 1, which is brilliant, because when I started doing these chats with people, we were on alert level 4. So we've come a long way in the last few months. There was a second almost lockdown in South Africa to help curb the infection rate, which worked very well, which is great. And it now means alert level 1. As of the 1st of October, people can start flying in internationally. Now, I must say, we still don't know whether that means the UK will be able to fly internationally or not. We were hoping to hear back before we were having this chat with you all this evening, but we have not yet heard. We're meant to hear sometime this week, so that literally means the South African government has 1 more day to tell us whether we're on the list of green countries, essentially, which means we'd be allowed to fly in there and fly out, of course, later on. So keep your fingers crossed for that. So hopefully, as of the 1st of October, we'll be able to go back. If not, though, I can't imagine it being too much longer until we're once again allowed to go and tour around the beautiful Rainbow Nation. But I just thought I'd pop that up there. Of course, you can follow the Presidency of South Africa on Facebook, on Twitter as well, just in case you want to be kept up to date. You can also be kept up to date simply by following the UK government advice websites as well for travel.
Steve, can I just ask you in there? So the 1st of October is the date that they're opening to international visitors, which is what we heard last week. But I understand that domestic tourism has been going on for several weeks now. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that. You're right. So domestic tourism started on alert level 2. So this has been going for about 6 weeks now. Actually. It's been great just to help kickstart the economy a little bit, but it also means, most importantly, when visitors come from international destinations, such as the UK, of course, when they're flying out of London, it means that these guys have ironed out all of their little teething problems they might have had after opening back up to tourism after being shut down for some times, meaning that it's going to be a very simple, clean, easy process to get through. The other thing that I should probably mention, it's all about being COVID safe at the moment. The South African government has followed very, very strictly the World Health Organization guidelines in regards to tourism here. They've also been accredited by the WHO, as well as another tourism organization too, which I've now obviously forgotten the name of because I'm meant to be talking about it as we speak. It'll come back to me though. So that's a really handy thing, because it means the accreditation's there. It means that you have the confidence in knowing that once you get to go to South Africa, you'll be kept well safe, very, very safe, and they'll be following all the correct procedures in order to keep you away from other people in regard to social distancing, wearing masks, all that sort of jazz. So why South Africa? For anyone that might be wondering why you would go to this amazing country, if you haven't been to parts of Africa before, it's a great start. I like to start from the south and make my way up to the north, and you've got to start with the most exciting and most varied country within Southern Africa. There's direct flights, that certainly makes a big difference. Of course, that's not the only way to get to South Africa. There are plenty of amazing deals that Putney Travel can look into for you. Flying via the Netherlands, for example, it's a 40-minute flight with KLM over to Amsterdam, and then the 11 to 12-hour flight down. There's a lot of different opportunities. Turkish Airlines fly down there quite a fair bit, have very reasonable prices, as well as Emirates, Etihad, and a few of the other Middle Eastern carriers as well. Now, at the moment, of course, there may be talk of a visa being needed. If that's the case, that's just simply due to COVID. In general times, no visa is required for UK and / or EU residents. So for anyone that's an EU resident that's listening to this at the moment, you might not be a UK passport holder, absolutely fine. A visa in normal times isn't required. Again, that'll be clarified in the next couple of days to see whether we are one of those countries that will be allowed in without a visa or not. We will see how we go. But in regular times, visa is not required. And I can assure you that once things start settling down and going back to normal, it'll once again be the case. And that's simply because the UK is one of the top 2 markets traveling into South Africa. They love the Brits and they want the Brits to keep coming back and enjoying the amazing country. Very scenic beauty. Now, some of these might be you might go, well, that's obvious, I'm sure. But I like to talk about it anyway because I'm talking about scenic beauty, but very shortly I'm going to show you just how amazing scenic beauty can be. A lot of coastline, 2,600 kilometers worth of coastline there. So for anyone that thinks they could go to South Africa, enjoy a safari, see Cape Town, and then maybe plonk themselves on a beach somewhere else in the Indian Ocean, you can definitely do that. Or you can just stay in South Africa and enjoy one of the beaches that they've got there. Remember, the eastern part of South Africa, that goes all the way along the Indian coastline, the Indian Ocean coastline. So that means the water there is warm all year round. So you've got white sandy beaches as well. It's very swimmable, very nice, warm and comfortable hanging around in South Africa to enjoy the rest of your holiday too. A very rich history and culture. I'm sure many of you know the history, certainly the recent history of South Africa. It was once upon a time a very different country. What it is these days. It celebrates its 26th year of democracy this year. Last year being a quarter century, there were a lot of celebrations all around the country for it, and some of those have continued on into 2020 as well, which is quite nice. Apart from that, heck of a lot of culture there as well. And to put that into perspective, there are 11 official languages within South Africa. I don't personally know another country has that many official languages. 11, that's a lot. The other good thing to keep in mind though is, even though there's a lot of different official languages, which gives you an idea of the varied cultures of South Africa, the main language of business, the lingua franca if you like, is English. And that means when you get there, anyone and everyone that you chat to that works in the tourism industry, that will take your order at a table, that will drive you from A to B, they speak English, and they speak English very fluently, absolutely able to understand you. It's no problem at all. South Africa is really well known for active adventure, and I feel like in the last 5 to 10 years, it's become more increasingly known for that. For example, if anyone is a bit of an adrenaline junkie, personally, I have done it. It's scary, but it's amazing once you've finished. It's called Blucrons Bridge. So basically, there's a very large bridge in between the Eastern and the Western Capes, and it's where the world's longest bungee jump is, longest commercial bungee jump. So the Kiwis might have invented bungee jumping, but the South Africans have had this officially Guinness World Record set as the longest bungee jump in the world. And it's pretty fun, but definitely bring a change of underwear if you're going to do it. What's interesting is if you don't want to do it, but you want to see it happen, once you drive off the bridge, you'll actually be able to look on as people do it themselves. And I'll tell you, that in itself is exhilarating to watch. Bring some popcorn, have a drink or two, and watch and be thoroughly entertained by people jumping off 2 different sides of the bridge and then slowly being hoisted back up. very interesting experience. And just to get your heart racing a little bit more, it also includes getting a zip line from one side of the bridge to the other in order to actually do the jump. So it's pretty hair-raising for a few different moments. But that's just one of many examples of active adventure. You can even bungee jump off the old cooling towers, which are known as the Orlando Towers in Soweto, near Johannesburg. You can go parasailing, paragliding, you can go skydiving. Things are a little bit more calm and relaxed as well. You can go zip lining, sometimes up to 250 meters above the canopy in the Western Cape, as well as KwaZulu-Natal. So there's some pretty fun, active, adventurous things to do within South Africa. Charlie's already mentioned this, and it probably needs another mention very quickly because I can't stress enough just how amazing food is within South Africa. Working for the Government Tourism Board, obviously we do a lot of different surveys. Because we don't book tours directly, we leave that to the amazing travel industry to help you out, of course. But we do want to make sure people know about South Africa. So we do a lot of surveys. We take it out to people like yourselves, different associations, different organizations, and we say, you know, what do you rank South Africa in regard to wine, in regard to active adventure, culture, history, and of course food. And interestingly, the study that we did in 2017, so it's a couple of years old now, we surveyed people coming into the country and we gave them a list of options for food. And most of the time, and in fact the majority of the time, they put France as the #1 culinary destination out of the options we gave them. On their exit interview, so after flying back out of South Africa, we caught them at the airport again, and #1 was then South Africa when it came to a culinary destination, to their #1 culinary destination. So cannot stress enough how amazing the food is within South Africa. Fantastic, so many of the restaurants are. A couple of them won quite a number of awards as well. Most recently one in the Western Cape, about an hour north of Cape Town there. And going with that, of course, is the wine, that's for sure. But the most amazing thing that ties the food and wine in together is the value of the wine. So at the moment, obviously there are things happening in the world, but it's 21 Rand to the pound. I'll show you a slide shortly just to put that into perspective for you as well. The next slide I want to show you is possibly one of the most important ones for the night, the wine. You can't go wrong with the wine. Now, this beautiful place here is very close to Franschhoek, but it's just on the other side of Stellenbosch Mountain Range. This is one of many wineries here. This is also very typical of the weather that you get in the summertime in South Africa, certainly in the Western Cape there. The most amazing thing about the wine regions is that you can go and have a drink of Pinotage. You can buy an entire bottle that's cellar door, that's high quality, that will cost a fair bit if you bought it over, even in Tesco or something like that over here in the UK. But over there, 5 or 6 quid. It's nothing. It's absolutely amazing indeed. Now let's start with Cape Town. If we're talking cities in general, obviously I'm talking about an entire country. And it's very hard in 40 minutes to talk about an entire country in detail, but I'm going to talk about Cape Town, I'm going to talk about Durban, and I'm also going to talk about Johannesburg, just to give you a bit of an idea as to where you're basing yourself before you go out and start experiencing a few other things as well. So my recommendation, if you wanted to get the most out of Cape Town before moving on to the next destination, whether that be doing a drive, of course, going north or going towards the east along the garden route there, or perhaps you were flying up to the Kruger National Park or something like that, spending 4 nights or 5 days in Cape Town will give you plenty of time to explore as well as relax in the amazing mother city. So, good thing to mention is that it's only a 2-hour flight from Johannesburg. Now, the reason I mention that is because although there are direct flights to Cape Town, a lot of people will fly via Johannesburg first before heading down. The other reason I mention that is because although South Africa is a much larger country than the UK, it's still smaller in comparison to some of those other long-haul destinations. So think about the US, think about Canada, Australia, places like that that will take you 4 or 5 hours to fly from one side of the country to the other. Here, 2 hours is about as long as it takes. And that's a really handy thing because theoretically it means you can see more in a shorter amount of time and get a hell of a lot more out of the destination too. It's a very metropolitan city, that's for sure. It's nice and big and clean and modern. There's a lot of amazing historical areas around there, but you will find it being a bustling metropolis is quite nice because it gives an air of familiarity if you visited other metropolises around the world. Table Mountain is certainly by far one of the most amazing features, if you ask me, in the world. Certainly of South Africa, and in fact, it's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world as well. Now, if you don't know what Table Mountain is, this photo here has been taken from the mountain. The mountain is essentially a flat top, tabletop mountain, hundreds of millions of years old. The top section was once upon a time at the bottom of the sea floor. The rock compressed a little bit harder in this area. Everything eroded around it, but it stayed, and it's amazing. You can catch a cable car up to the top. You can be adventurous and walk up to the top as well. For the extremely fit people, which is not me, it can take about an hour. Otherwise, it takes 2 to 3 hours to get to the top. But trust me, it is absolutely stunning once you get there. And of course, you don't have to walk. For anyone that's feeling even more adventurous than that, going back down, you can also do some abseiling or rappelling down to the bottom too if you wanted. So there's a few different ways of getting up and then back down the mountain. Now, the great thing about the mountain, obviously, is the views. But the other great thing about Table Mountain is that the views are panoramic. They're 360 degrees. To do a walk around the top without doing any of the other walks, because there are other walks you can do starting from Table Mountain, going further along, it takes about 40 minutes. So it's quite easy. It does undulate a little bit, but the path is relatively flat. Just keep in mind there are a few steps here and there. There's a great pub up the top, also serves as a tiny little supermarket as well. Plus there's a bar up there with Wi-Fi. Now, personally, my favorite thing about this, views aside, this is where you might see the first of your African wildlife. Now, you would not be expecting to see it, but actually there's an animal that lives up here that is more closely related to the African elephant than anything else. And it's not that big at all. In fact, it's about this big. It's about the same size as my little lion just here, called Bukela. As you can see, he's also made in South Africa too. He's got the right stamp there. It's called a dassie, and a dassie is related closer to the African elephant than anything else. And when you see one of these animals, I probably should have included in my slideshow, but I haven't. They are very, very cute little things, and they are all around Table Mountain, and they're very, very used to seeing people. Of course, we don't touch them. That's certainly not something that we promote, but it just does mean that you'll get some great photo opportunities with them because they'll be up close and personal with you as well. Now, we've got the world-class food and wine in Cape Town. I think we've probably briefly touched on that before. You've also got very close to the mother city, Boulders Beach. Now, driving out on an area called the Chapman's Peak Drive, which continues through places like Hout Bay, Simonstown, all the way down to Cape Point, which I'll talk about in a second. Boulders Beach is along the way. Now, this is one of a few areas that you can see this particular creature, but it's certainly one of the most popular areas because you can guarantee that there will be an animal here. Now, it's quite funny when you talk to people in travel and you say, you know, can you guarantee that I will see African wildlife? It's always very hard to guarantee. Even if you go to a big 5 private game reserve or a national park, we can never guarantee that you'll see the big 5 there, of course, because they're wild animals, they're running around. But the amazing thing about the African penguin, and that is what you can see down on Boulders Beach, is that they are not nomadic. They stay in the one place. They breed and they pair for life as well. The first breeding pairs started to arrive in the late 70s, early 1980s in Boulders Beach, and they've been there ever since. So it does mean when you go there, even if some are out and about swimming around the ocean catching some fish, there will still be others that are there. They are opportunistic breeders as well. So it doesn't mean they'll breed seasonally. They'll just start breeding whenever the weather is looking decent, whenever there's enough food around too. So that also means at any time of the year, you can go and see some African penguins. They're the only penguin, or the only type of penguin that you find on the African continent as well. And there are other opportunities to see them, but this is certainly one of the most amazing and certainly one of the most famous places to see the penguins at good old Boulders Beach. Cape Point, if you continue driving along the beautiful Chapman's Peak Drive, that's where you'll get down to. You might have heard of Cape Point before. If you haven't, it's the most southwesterly point of the African continent. It also goes by a couple of other names. Historically, it was also known as the Cape of Storms by the Portuguese that first sailed around there in the 1500s, and it's also known as the Cape of Good Hope. So if you've heard of the Cape of Good Hope before, That's Cape Point, basically. It's a big, beautiful national park there. There's a fantastic restaurant with amazing views. Most importantly, there are amazing walks along the cliff edge that give you fantastic views off into the distance as well. There are also very friendly baboons. You might realize that pretty much everything I talk about today will include wildlife as well. Now, these baboons are extra friendly if you've got very shiny things on you. So do just keep that in mind. I think that's always quite a hot tip. And of course, please don't feed them when you get down there, because that means they get a bit more excited and a bit more used to people as well. But trust me, the food down there, you're not going to want to share it with the baboons anyway, because it's delicious to do so. The V&A waterfront, historically, it's the Victoria and Alfred waterfront. It wasn't named after Albert, Queen Victoria's husband. It was named after her son, because her son, Prince Alfred, was the one that went and opened the V&A waterfront in the 1850s. So it's got a bit of history behind it there. Of course, you will be able to see a little bit of that history when you go there. It is, for example, still a working dock. Now that makes it interesting, because not only is it a working dock, but it has a lot of amazing world-class tourism facilities as well. There's a miniature version of the London Eye, which gives you pretty amazing views once you go up to the top. You've also got the Two Oceans Aquarium, so that's a really big thing for anyone that are taking kids down. Massive family adventurers going down to Cape Town and spending a day or so on the V&A waterfront there. They've got cinema, they've got fantastic places to go shopping, the curio shops, which are the souvenir shops, a lot of African-made jewelry, African-made products, which is obviously very important. We want you to shop local while you're down there. And it's also got a couple of amazing hotels, as well as bars, cafes, restaurants. It really is an entire entertainment precinct around the V&A waterfront. Now, to talk about something a little bit more somber, but still equally important, is Robben Island. Now, for anyone that doesn't know about Robben Island, of course, we haven't mentioned him yet, Madiba, Nelson Mandela, who passed away in 2013. It's been a little while now. He was in his 90s when he did. He spent most of his life fighting for a very different vision of South Africa. And of course, he was able to achieve that by becoming South Africa's first black president in 1994, after only being released from prison, from political prison, just a few years prior to that. Now, he was in prison for almost 30 years, and for almost 20 of those years, he spent that on Robben Island. And that's why it's a really important part of South Africa's past. You'll find that South Africans are very transparent as well, particularly the younger ones that are of the born-free generation, people that are born post-1994. Of course, they don't remember the past. They talk very, very differently about it as well. But going to Robben Island is a must-do, not because it's a positive experience, but because it's an amazing, rewarding experience. It wasn't just Mandela that was held prisoner there. He was one of hundreds of political prisoners that spent decades on this particular island. Now, getting out there is a half-an-hour ferry ride from the V&A waterfront itself. Once you arrive, you'll be taken in a coach around the island. You won't just see the jail, you'll see a few other areas. If you're lucky enough, you'll see more African penguins. There are more tortoises there than I've ever seen anywhere else in my entire life as well. So keep that in mind too. Again, all about the wildlife, of course. But probably the most fascinating thing is 9 times out of 10, your tour guide is actually an ex-prison inmate. So essentially, the story that you're hearing and understanding while you're out at Robben Island, you're getting that story straight from the horse's mouth. You're getting that story straight from people that were there, that lived it, that experienced it, and they've chosen to stay on the island to tell their story as well. So it's a really, truly rewarding experience to go and see Robben Island while you're down there in Cape Town. Now, let's talk Johannesburg. Joburg for many, many years was certainly a place that when I do these presentations, when I talk to people like yourselves, when I talk to travel trade, lots of different things, a lot of people will give me a lot of different reasons as to why they've avoided going to Johannesburg in the past. Now, South Africa's come a long way in the last 25, 26 years. This city is the 3rd largest city on the African continent. And not only that, but it has come a long way in the last 5 to 10 years as well. Places that were no-go zones once upon a time are absolute must-go zones now. There's been a complete revitalisation. There have been a lot of community projects that have been put forward by the Gauteng provincial government, which means a lot of these areas now invite you in. You go in to have a bit of a look around. You get some amazing curio. Of course, when I say curio, that's the same as a souvenir shop. You've got some fantastic precincts at farmers markets, at regular food markets, clothing, all that sort of stuff. But most importantly, you get to see the people of Johannesburg and how vibrant they are as well. So that's why I've just written on my screen here that you can see Johannesburg is more than just a stopover, because it has come a long way in the last few years. And in fact, our head office is based there. So I spend more time in Johannesburg than I do in any other city or any other region in South Africa when I travel there. And I have a splendid time every time I go. Now, one of the reasons I have a splendid time is because they've got many cool, hip sort of areas, just like Marbodeng that I've mentioned here. Now, Marbodeng is just one of many areas, but think of Shoreditch here in London, and Marbodeng is very similar to that. That exchange rate, if you're buying yourself a delicious barista coffee, it's not going to cost you £2.60, it's going to cost you 60p. If you're having a few craft beers at one of the microbreweries in Marbodeng, it's not going to cost you £5. It's going to cost you about £1.50. I cannot stress enough just how amazing the exchange rate is when you go down to South Africa, but also the quality of the food and the wine and the beer and the coffee once you go down there. And of course, the quality of smiles on people's faces too. Other amazing places to see while you're in Johannesburg, you've got Constitution Hill. This was a former political prison, just like Robben Island. Racial segregation happened all throughout every facet of life, even in the prison system. And there were a lot of white political prisoners that were also opposed to the apartheid regime. And this is where they were housed for many decades. This is now the Constitutional Court of South Africa. You can go and see the Flame of Democracy. You can go and see a court case if you want, but that's probably a little bit boring. But walking through the building itself, knowing that it was a former political prison that put perspex glass up where a lot of graffiti has been put, to see the lives and to see the thoughts of those prisoners once upon a time, it's once again a very moving place, just like Robben Island is, and it's a must-see for anyone that's doing a day tour within Johannesburg. Now, a little bit further out of Jozi, the main city within South Africa, you've got Pretoria. I didn't mention before, or I did mention that there are 11 official languages in South Africa. There are 9 amazing provinces as well, and believe it or not, there are 3 capital cities within South Africa. Now, that's just a product of history. That's to do with Boers going and making their own little republics, the British coming in and signing a truce after the Second Anglo-Boer War. I won't bore you too much with the history because I'd encourage you to go down there and check out the history yourselves. But Pretoria is one of the capitals, and Pretoria is the presidential capital or the executive capital. So this is where the office of the president is. The beautiful buildings called the Union Buildings are there. Cape Town is another one of the capital cities as well. That's the parliamentary capital. And then in the Free State, you've got Bloemfontein, and that is the judicial capital. So that's where the courts are, except for the Constitutional Court, of course. So interestingly, Johannesburg is not the national capital, and it's just the provincial capital of Gauteng, and that's it. So Pretoria, very beautiful historic city there. You can go and see some amazing architecture going back all the way to the early 1800s when those Dutch republics or those Boer republics started to open up. There's a lot of history around this area as well. You've got the Voortrekkers monument there, talking about the history of the Voortrekkers making their way from Cape Town up through the Grand Karoo all the way to where Pretoria is now. You've also got the National War Memorial. Now, this memorial also has the beautiful Peace Gardens, amazing landscape gardens with fantastic views all over the city of Pretoria there. These don't just commemorate wars with other countries or the Anglo-Boer standard wars. They also commemorate the war against the apartheid regime. It has the names of every single person that was that had passed away throughout any war that was there. Now, one time, and in fact, it was the first time that I went there, just to tell you a little personal story, my tour guide, Charles, he's a man that was from Soweto. He knows Johannesburg like the back of his hand, and he knew Pretoria really well as well. And it had only just opened up the newer section with all the names on the wall of the National War Memorial. And he found his mother's name because unfortunately she was killed in the struggle against apartheid. And it was just one of the most emotionally moving moments to sit down with him while he came to that realization. So again, there's quite a few moving places when you come to these areas. But again, it's a very important past a part, sorry, of who South Africa is as a nation today, to go and understand and explore these areas too. Now, the cradle of humankind is a different side of history. You don't have to remember the name specifically, but if you're a bit of a history as well as a paleontology nerd like myself, the Australopithecines, or the Australopithecus, it's a type of stand-up hominid or humanoid that is quite possibly related to ourselves, that existed 2 to 3 million years ago. The oldest bones were the bones of a female found in Central Africa called Lucy. You might have heard of her before, but that exact same species has also been found in South Africa. So this is another World Heritage listed area just here, and this is the cradle of humankind, where you can go and see where these bones have been found, where they're fossilized, as well as a lot of history on the history of the planet in general, but then the history of human evolution. It's a very, very amazing place to go. Now, this isn't located in Johannesburg or in Pretoria, but it is just about a 2-hour drive out of Johannesburg into the Northwest Province, very close to the beautiful Magaliesberg mountain ranges, which has an array of different things that you can do within that area as well, including a cable car up to the top. You can even see Botswana off in the distance, which is quite cool. And you can also take a balloon flight there, which is just one of the most stunning things over rural farmland that you can do in South Africa. And last but definitely not least, the Apartheid Museum. Without going too much on about it, it's another must-see whilst in Johannesburg, folks. And I forgot to mention, sorry, Soweto actually stands for the Southwestern Townships. It was gazetted by the authorities back in the 1940s and 50s. It's now the largest township in South Africa. It's well over 1 million people there. And they absolutely love having people down there to show them around. Vilakazi Street is now one of the most popular places in South Africa for tourists to go and visit. That's the main street in Soweto. And I'll tell you another amazing thing, aside from all the restaurants that they have on Vilakazi Street, it's the only place in the world where you can see 2 houses that face each other that both belonged to Nobel Peace Prize winners. One of them was Nelson Mandela, and the other is Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He's still alive and kicking and well, and he still lives in that house as well. You might even be lucky to catch a glimpse of him walking in and out of there from time to time. Now, very quickly, we'll talk about Durban as well. Durban has a very special place in my heart because it was the first city that I ever got to see within South Africa. It was when I was a young chap living in Australia, hence the accent, bit of a mix of British and Australian. I'd flown over from Perth in WA, and we spent almost a week with family and friends, and then traveling around as well. And I absolutely fell in love with the place. The beach, just how warm the ocean is there as well. It reminded me a lot of my home country too, which is quite good. The most amazing thing about Durban is it's a subtropical climate. So that means even in the winter time for South Africa, which is June, July, August, it's still relatively warm there, which is great. And it means that you can still swim in the ocean there all year round. Now, if we're talking about Durban, again, for any of those adrenaline junkies, the big rush is one of those amazing things that you can do to get the heart pumping. So there were a whole bunch of stadiums that were built in South Africa back in 2010. So they're about 10 years old now, but that was for the FIFA World Cup when it was held down in South Africa. So it's a big old stadium just to the east, just to the west of Johannesburg. You've also got one in Cape Town, and you've got an amazing one called Moses Mabhida Stadium, and that's in Durban. Now, the Big Rush is a stadium swing, and it's the largest stadium swing in the world. We like to have the largest, the tallest, the longest things in the world, of course, and you swing from the top of the stadium all the way along to the other end, and then eventually get dragged back up. Now, it's something that I've done, and I've also been lucky enough to see my boss do it. What was even more amazing is I got to video my boss do it and then send it off to everyone. So it was good fun to watch that. Now, I mentioned very briefly before the Midlands. It's sort of known as a very popular tourism route called Midlands Meander. So just like the Garden Route and just like the Panorama Route, this is a nice, fantastic, and very safe place to drive around, driving on the right side of the road as well, on the left side of the road, I mean, right as in the correct side of the road is what I meant to say there. Around the Midlands, all the way up to the Drakensberg Mountains and across to a few other areas. But this would be the beginning of your fantastic KwaZulu-Natal, or what we abbreviate to the KZN trip. Swimming is a very popular thing. I sort of mentioned that before with the beaches. I was just getting a bit ahead of myself. Surfing right out the front of the city of Durban Also, you've got some fantastic surfing areas just to the south in the Eastern Cape as well. In fact, you've got the Surfing World Championships that are held every few years just down in the Eastern Cape as well. So South Africa is very well known for its amazing surfable waves, but surfing is doable right here in Durban as well for anyone that wants to give it a go. They've got some fantastic surfing schools right out on the Golden Mile. I feel like any good beachside city in the world, think of Miami or the Gold Coast in Australia, the Riviera in France as well. Everywhere's got a good Golden Mile, and South Africa's no different. So the Golden Mile, not only do you have the amazing beach, which I chose this photo because I love the atmosphere of the photo, but it does show the beach at low tide, so it probably doesn't look quite as tantalizing, but trust me, it's a very beautiful swimmable beach, both in central Durban, to the north in Umhlanga Rocks as well, and a little bit further north again in a place called Belito, where a lot of people go and stay. But the Golden Mile has all your shops, your cafes, your restaurants, and these are some of the main hotels looking off the distance there as well. Florida Road is another place to go, and I tend to find when I travel overseas that it's always nice to go and experience what the locals experience. And Florida Road is where you find the locals. So if you go to all the bars there, the pubs, the clubs, or if you even stay at some of the hotels, you'll get to know some of the South Africans that are born and bred people from Durbanites. Drakensberg mountain range, very stunning. If you can picture Julie Andrews singing "The Hills Are Alive" with the sound of music in Austria. Very, very similar hills to that. You might even be forgiven for being mistaken that you're in Switzerland or Austria or somewhere like that because of the rolling green hills, except rolling green hills here don't have cattle grazing on them. They've got baboons grazing on them instead. It's all about the wildlife still. What I love about the Drakensberg Mountains, they're high up enough to be actually a little bit chilly. So they're not subtropical like the rest of KwaZulu-Natal. They even get a little bit of snow on them. And just on the other side of the Drakensberg, you've got ski fields. Now, when I say the other side, you might not know, but there is a landlocked nation that's bordered all around by South Africa called Lesotho. And Lesotho has a number of ski fields that the South Africans go to each winter there. You can give it a go yourself if you want, but I'm sure you're probably not going to go to South Africa just for the skiing, but trust me, the mountain range themselves, absolutely stunning views from places like Giant's Castle. You've got Champagne Castle there as well. You've got an area called the Cradle that you walk through. And what I absolutely love about it as well is there's a lot of early human history there. And I'm talking us humans. So the Khoisan were the first people, the first modern humans that inhabited the southern part of the African continent, and a lot of their evidence can be found here. The Khoisan are still people that live in South Africa as well, but they live like modern South Africans. But once upon a time, there were cave paintings, there were rituals that they still do, and these cave paintings can still be found in the Drakensberg mountain range. Some of these cave paintings are thought to be thousands of years old as well, and you can get guided cultural tours through that area too. Fields for any of those history nuts. I mentioned it briefly before, but some of the biggest battles like the Battle of Spionkop, the Battle of Isandlwana, if you've heard of it, the Battle of Rorke's and Fugitive's Drift, all of those names, if any of that rings a bell, they're all in a very similar area to each other, even though they happened at different points in time. That's because this area is the place to go. You can go and visit all of those areas, you can pay your respects, and you can understand that more recent part of South African history too. Now the capture site, if you're wondering what the capture site is, this is Nelson Mandela's capture site. When he was caught in the early 1960s, he was posing as a driver for the leader of the South African Communist Party. In fact, him and his benefactor were both members of the African National Congress on the run from the apartheid authorities at the time. Point where he was captured is in what is now the KwaZulu-Natal province, the old Natal province it was known as back then. And there's a commemoration area, there's a fantastic memorial there, and they've also built a museum dedicated to Nelson Mandela, as well as the wider struggle in the long walk to freedom for that era, for those years, basically. So it's a highly recommended part of your overall KZN itinerary to go and visit this capture site as well. Plus, it's very close to a town called Howick, where there are magnificent waterfalls tumbling down. Great views down there. And of course, you can't go by KZN without talking about that beautiful area known as wetlands. So the main area, or the main town around Xihlue Infolosi Park, is called St. Lucia. So not St. Lucia in the Caribbean, but St. Lucia in South Africa instead. Now, I'll tell you one of my most memorable experiences about South Africa. I was in the town of St. Lucia, and I was at a pub. I was eating my meal. I was having a beer, and where I was lucky enough just to be looking off into the town centre itself because I was on a balcony. All of a sudden, I saw all of these cars stop. People got their phones out. They started taking photos, but I couldn't quite see what they were taking photos of at first until I got up and looked around the corner. There were 5 hippos just walking across the road, and they'd stopped traffic. I was talking to some of the local townsfolk, and they were saying that it was just a normal thing. And in fact, it happens more or less every night there. So African wildlife is truly all around you. Now, just a word of warning with hippos, you don't go too close to them to take a photo because they actually can be quite dangerous. But from a safe distance where I was, it was absolutely fantastic to see 5 of them walking off into the distance. And apparently they were going to go and get the best grass for grazing in the evening, which was the high school oval. So they were walking off to high school basically for their evening grazing, but just one of many amazing experiences. But that was very close to the wetlands in St. Lucia. Now, I'm going to show you one last video, so apologies again if there's a bit of skipping there, but I feel like it sums up safari. And then I get to talk about probably everyone's favourite scenario, which is going down to South Africa for a safari. So let's watch definitely a wow in every moment, particularly when it comes to safari. But one of the most important and probably fairly relevant questions that we get from people that want to travel to South Africa is where should they go for safari? What should they do? They've heard so many different things about private game reserves, national parks. What does it all mean? What's the difference? It's very, very easy. And of course, all of it is nice and bookable as well. Charlie can sort that out for you. But you've got national parks, which are run by the government. They do have certain concessions within national parks that private companies rent out those little parts of land, and you can stay overnight. You can go spotting just in that little area. But overall, you'll be taken around the larger national park area. Now, a national park also means that you can have a hire car. You can drive yourself in there. You've got opening and closing times, usually just before sunrise and just after sunset. It costs a daily entry amount, depending on which one it is to go in and out, usually about 15 to 20 pounds per person as an average. It does just depend on which park it is though, but that's like Kruger, for example, or Addo Elephant Park. And the other important thing to remember is you'll be one of many other people doing the exact same thing as you. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Going on safari in Kruger National Park and pulling up your hire car because you are only meters away from rhino that are relaxing in the shade is a pretty awesome experience, but you may just well be one of 10 other cars doing the exact same thing. What I personally love doing is a private game reserve experience. Now, keeping in mind that exchange rate, you're getting really good value for money at 4 5-star luxury properties while being chauffeured around by a tour guide. You can still drive your hire car to the beginning of these private game reserves, and then they're held in a secure lockup for you as well. But then being taken around the whole time that you're there, being shown by expert guides. They talk all about what animals you will see, what they spot. They get to show you tracks that you would have not have noticed yourself because you're not on a tar road or a sealed road. Also, you won't be one of 10 cars, for example. It'll just be you. If there's one other vehicle, that will be it, because most private game reserves will only allow 2 vehicles in the one area at the one time. And the guides will constantly be on the radio with each other, making sure that that's the case as well. And the other cool thing is the guides are constantly on the radio to each other. So if one guide happens to see the southern pride of lions running around near a very obvious area, he'll get on the radio and let everyone else know. So it means a higher chance that you'll be able to see the wildlife that you want to see, which is quite handy. Again, as I said, we can never guarantee that you'll see the big 5, but we certainly hope that you do so. Speaking of the big 5, if you don't know, giraffes, for example, that's not a part of the big 5. Hippo, not a part of the big 5. The big 5 is named so because back in the day when people decided to do hunting, which is obviously trophy hunting, quite a deplorable act that we certainly do not condone these days, but this is where historically the name came from, and it's because these were the 5 animals that were more than likely to get defensive with you if you were to hunt them. So the big 5 now are only shot with cameras instead, of course, but you've got the lion, you've got the leopard, arguably the most elusive is the leopard as well, by the way. You've got the rhinoceros, you've got the elephant, and then you've also got the Cape buffalo. And you can imagine a buffalo wanting to charge you if you're getting a little bit close to it. Interestingly enough, cheetahs were never added to that or anything like that, but that is the big 5, ladies and gents. Of course, there's way more than the big 5 in these parks, and you've got the marine big 5, for example, if you're going and spotting whales along the coast, seeing dolphins, all that sort of stuff, which is another big thing. Now, very typical day on safari, conscious that I don't want to keep you guys here for too long, but if you're doing a day on safari in a private game reserve, and there are loads of different private game reserves all around South Africa, it just depends on where you want to go. You've got dawn game drive. You'll see that there's a dusk game drive there as well. That's because these are the best times to see. They're most active at dawn and dusk in the twilight zones, and that's why most of the time this is what you'll get. Morning coffee break, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Basically, as you can tell, apart from those game drives, you have to put your back into taking it easy in these game reserves, and it's a pretty amazing thing to do. Now, just quickly, guys, if you want a bit of an idea how far your money will take you, 21 Rand to the pound at the moment is pretty impressive. This is a very typically Durban dish just here. This is called bunny chow. This is curry. That's not cream on top. That's the bread that was hollowed out sitting on top. Now, if you're like me, you can eat the entire thing. You'll regret it, but you can. But traditionally, actually, you just ate the inside, which was the curry bit, and the bread was simply used to cart the curry around. Fun fact about Durban is it has the highest population of Indian people outside of India. So they have a very, very big effect on the culture of the Zulu people and also to the eastern part of South Africa. And you've got beautiful, flavorful, fragrant, spicy dishes just like this bunny chow here as well. And that dry cider there, the Savannah, that's also fantastic. It's not too sweet. It goes really well with this. £3. That's all it costs. Just £3 for that entire meal just there. £1.40, not for this glass of rosé, but the entire carafe of rosé. And then £5 for ocean to plate style seafood just here near Hout Bay in the Western Cape. That was an American-sized dinner plate as well, so bigger than my face and my beard included. So that was pretty impressive. South Africa also, folks, is a whenever destination. It doesn't matter what time you want to escape the cold weather of the UK, or you want to go and thaw out a little bit, or if you even want to leave during the summer months, you can, because it's still just as warm in certain parts of South Africa as well. Bearing that in mind, if we're talking the Cape, spring and autumn time are very popular times to go. That's the shoulder season. You'll find prices are a little bit cheaper around then as well. June, July, August, that is the winter time. So there's a little bit more rain around at that point in time, and it is a little bit colder. But that's only the Cape, and it's still completely visitable. It's a Mediterranean climate, so bearing that in mind, it's not going to be raining and it's not going to be freezing cold all the time during the winter months, which is great to know. But that's just the Cape. The rest of South Africa is relatively subtropical, meaning it's fairly warm all year round, which is great. And if you want to see wildlife, winter time is obviously a good time because they'll roam around a little bit more because it's not the heat of the day yet. But do remember, just in case, it doesn't matter if you don't go in the winter time there, because if you're going wildlife spotting, if you're doing a dawn game drive or a dusk game drive, there's a very high chance you're going to start seeing the wildlife that you want to see anyway. And then I should talk about the peak season. you probably imagine that that's a South African summer. So that's December, January and February. So prices are a little more expensive there. But bearing in mind, of course, if you're booking, Partner Travel will advise you anyway that the exchange rate is brilliant, so it doesn't really matter too much anyway. But if you wanted to avoid the crowds, for example, it's good to know what the peak season is. Getting around is very easy as well. I can't mention it all, but hire car I have mentioned. There are quite a number of luxury train experiences as well, going between Cape Town and Pretoria, to Durban. You've got the Blue Train. You've also got the Shongololo Express, part of Rovos Rail, that you'll be able to chat to Charlie and the team about a little bit more. Of course, guided coach tours are very, very popular to take you from A to B. Taxis are nice and easy. Proper gazetted taxis. Uber is even a popular thing there, and super cheap, Uber cheap, if you like. Sorry, I've got possessed. Airlines, of course, fly you in between the destinations within South Africa as well as getting there, and we might even be lucky enough to have a galactic flight. Never be too sure. Just quickly, if you're missing a bit of South Africa, or if you want a bit more of an inspiration in getting there, check out Now TV. Robin Ronesh versus South African cricket. Hilarious 2 episodes of Ramesh Ranganathan and Rob Beckett, 2 comedians from the UK that went and travelled through South Africa. Work on the Wild Side, you can catch on Channel 4's catch-up version as well, about a whole bunch of young Brits that went down and worked with animals in South Africa. Amazing documentary series. World's Most Greatest Train Journeys. Yes, Mr. Portillo himself and his fabulous colourful pants have been down, and they've actually done there. And then keep an eye out this very month for Greg Wallace, and also it's actually out already on the National Geographic channel, Gordon Ramsay's Wild Adventures. It was an amazing episode, and where he's not swearing the whole time, but he does make some pretty impressive food down in South Africa. Greg Wallace, he actually travels all around South Africa, and it's a pretty culinary adventure as well, related to food, of course, and as I mentioned, South Africa well known for the food too. And then, of course, I'm sure I probably don't need to mention it, but SA 2021. By the way, the Lions tour, the Rugby Lions tour for the British and Irish Lions is confirmed. It is happening. Multiple cities hosting them as well, which is fantastic. Those cities, you've got Cape Town, you've got Durban, you've also got Nelspruit, forgot about that for a second, and Johannesburg as well will be hosting the rugby while they are down there, and that's in July and August next year. So again, Charlie and the team can sort that out for you. That's more or less it, guys. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you learned a thing or two. You might have some questions. I'm sure the most important question is, how do we get to South Africa right now, because you want to go, but I might hand it back over to Charlie, and yeah, we can take some
Steve, that was great. Thank you so much. That was great.
Pleasure.
Starving seeing that bunny chow. That really has set me off. Yeah, just on the Lions. I mean, we actually did the most recent Lions booking we did was a couple of weeks ago. There is still availability for the accommodation in and around the tests in Joburg and Cape Town, if anyone's interested. And obviously easier if it's some of the regional tests rather than the main international, the main ones against the Springboks. That was great. Does anyone have any questions out there? I've got a couple, but is anything spring to mind at the moment? Put it on the chat or just shout out. I was going to ask, you mentioned the marine big three, or the marine wildlife. I know Hermanus calls itself the sort of the whale capital of the world, just outside Cape Town.
Yes.
What's the best? Could you remind me what the best time of year to be there is?
Definitely. And yeah, you're right. I didn't even mention Hermanus. That was a bit rude of me, wasn't it? So it's only about a 2.5 hour drive out of Cape Town, which is good. So it could be part of an idea. If you wanted to drive yourselves along the garden route, Hermanus is indeed the whale watching capital of the world. The most amazing thing about the town is it's on a cliff edge. It's not on a beach. So think about that when you're watching and keeping an eye out for whales, particularly the humpbacks. They're breaching, so they're jumping out of the water and back in, which is good. The town crier is even equipped with a horn. He blows the horn every time whales actually migrate past there. Now, the best time of year to see whales there, and this is again talking about humpback whales, which make their migration. That's simply because they're the largest whales that can be found. You can also find orcas, or the killer whales, going through that area too. I've actually got an interesting story about two brother killer whales that hang out near Namibia, go down and eat the liver out of great white sharks and then swim back. Very fascinating. But that's August till November. Now that's the best time of year to go. So that's springtime and the very beginning of summer as well. Now in saying that, I have been in South Africa in December, and twice I've seen whales between Robben Island and Table Bay. So you can still see them at other times, of course, but that's the best time to see them because that is when the migration is actually occurring between the humpback whales. Now, smaller whales, and certainly dolphins as well, southern right whales, for example, you'll find them infrequently, but they'll be there all year round, which is quite handy to keep in mind as well. But if you do August to November, best chance of seeing those whales swimming past Hermanus and other parts of the coast as well.
Okay, great stuff. And if you had to base yourself in and around the Wineland areas, where would you be choosing your favorite spot?
Now, it's hard working for the Government Tourism Board to say what our favourite is, but let me say that my top place out of all of the amazing top places would probably be Franschhoek. So you've got a few different areas in the Wineland, plural. So if you're driving to Stellenbosch, for example, it's almost an hour's drive, but actually just another 20 minutes on from there, a little bit further away, is Franschhoek. You've got Wellington, you've got Paarl, you've got lots of different areas. But what I like about Franschhoek is it's a little bit more boutique, if you like, than Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch is a fantastic place to go. Heck of a lot of history, amazing wine, of course, really good food around that area as well. It's also a university town. So there's a lot of young'uns running around, causing a bit of a ruckus from time to time. Still a fantastic place to go, but if you want somewhere a little bit more quiet, it's just the one main street in Franschhoek as well. It's an Afrikaans word for French corner. It was actually settled by the French Huguenots in the late 1600s there. It was very fascinating. And they, in fact, were the ones that brought wine to South Africa. And they introduced it to the Dutch, and therefore Stellenbosch started growing wine after that. So it's quite fascinating history, but that would be my bet. And the other cool thing about Franschhoek is the fact that they've got a tram line through there. It's not a railway line that's been repurposed when it closed down, and now you have wine trams taking you from A to B. So they can pick you up out the front of your accommodation in a truck dressed like a tram if you're not on the tram line itself, and then they take you to the tram. Otherwise, you can hop straight on. It's a hop on, hop off service, a couple of different routes to take, and it means there is no drink driving. That's probably the most important thing too.
Great, thanks for that. We've got a question in there from Kate. What about diving in South Africa? Any diving for those scuba fans out there?
Absolutely, good question. Yeah, in fact, there's quite a number of people that do diving trips from Namibia all the way down through the Northern Cape to the Western. Of course, we don't look after Namibia, but I certainly know there's a number of companies out there that do trips just like that, because that part of the Atlantic Ocean is very clear. It's also getting close to where the convergence current between the two big oceans, one being the Indian and one being the Atlantic, actually is. So it's quite a hot spot for diving, certainly not tropical diving or anything like that though. And then on the other side, on the eastern side of things, you can actually go diving in KwaZulu-Natal, very close to St. Lucia, where the wetlands peter out and the river goes into the ocean there. That's another popular spot for diving as well, which is just down south of Maputo.
Great. Anyone else out there got any questions?
I've got a question. Sorry, you might have covered this at the beginning.
That's all right. Hi, Sophie.
I missed the start. Sorry. What about safety and security?
Very good question. And look, I touched briefly on it, but I probably should go into a little bit more detail. So again, that's probably a similar thing to Johannesburg. A lot of people have heard a lot of things about safety and security in South Africa. Traveling as a tourist through South Africa, I think, is very different to hanging around in suburbs and townships and all that sort of stuff. And as a tourist, sticking to the main routes is absolutely fine. You know, I've traveled down there so many times. My colleagues have, people I know from South Africa, they have absolutely no issue traveling through the areas that they travel through. There has been issues in the past, most certainly, but in this day and age, it's not something that's a really big thing. And in fact, in the last couple of years, there's been more funding put into some of the more touristy spots, such as the Garden Route, the Panorama Route, and driving around KwaZulu-Natal and places like that, with tourism police being employed. So it means they're quite safe. Apart from that, though, South Africa is a developing country, just like any developing country. You do have your wits about you. Probably don't wear your best jewelry in dark alleyways and walk through at night and things like that. But in general, safety shouldn't be too much of an issue if you're sticking to those touristy areas.
Brilliant.
And Sophie, on the driving side of things, I mean, often, you know, people have a sort of a slight hesitation to begin with about driving, because it's a natural way to get around. But you know, it always turns out that it works well. It's a good option, and people feel safe and secure doing it. So you know, it really is something that.
And they're good roads, aren't they?
Very much so, yeah. So they're very well looked after, particularly between the West and the Eastern Cape. Certainly the most traversed road by the Brits when we look at our statistics. Absolutely no issue there at all. So yeah, these are sealed roads, so tarmacked roads. So very, very good, Nick, which is good.
Lovely, thank you.
That's all right, no problems.
Anyone else got any questions? I can see Kate, you've got another question there.
Me. Hi, Steve. Sorry. There, people have told me in Cape Town there's quite a big art scene.
Very, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Cape Town is probably the artiest of all the cities. I mean, Johannesburg's got some really great quarters. Even got a gym in Durban, so I'd recommend visiting those cities as well. But yeah, most certainly, if you're going to Cape Town, you go to Bokup, for example. Beautiful, colourful buildings there, but amazing shops as well. Because Cape Town is such a melting pot of cultures due to history. You know, you've got the old Dutch culture, you've got British culture, you've got Xhosa culture as well, one of the 11 official languages of the Xhosa people. And you've also got the Cape Malays. So these are descended from Malaysian slaves that were brought by the Dutch when it was the East India Trading Company from what is now Jakarta, and they were brought there to help them out with a myriad of different tasks, I guess, but their culture still very much exists there. They're very, very arty sort of people, and apart from that, you've got fantastic cafe culture, you've got amazing art galleries, you've got huge food halls right down on the Cape Town waterfront. Probably one of my favourites is the Old Biscuit Mill. It's basically an old factory that used to make biscuits, and they've turned it into this amazing eatery, as well as really cool other markets surrounding that area as well. But in general, Cape Town is absolutely arty.
Cool. Music as well?
Oh, yes, I probably should have mentioned music, shouldn't I? Yeah. Music scene's really good. The live music scene in particular is fantastic down there. There's something called The Sports Bar, and it doesn't sound like anything amazing, I know, but it's just out of the V&A waterfront, and it's an old-fashioned bar. It's been around for years, and they do some fantastic music there, and I'm talking music from all cultures. It's very, very good fun. But that's just one of many, and yes, the music is brilliant in Cape Town.
Cool. Awesome.
Great stuff. Well, Steve, I think you know, that's just been a brilliant eye opener for you know, all there is in the country. Thank you so much for that. I personally can't wait to get back there at some stage as soon as possible.
Tell me about it.
So I hope everyone who's joined us found it useful. I hope and enjoyable. Next up, just to whet your appetite, we've got a visit to Costa Rica, beautiful Costa Rica, with our friends from Journey Latin America in a month's time on Thursday, the 22nd of October. So please come along and join us for that. We'll put the event out on the usual social media channels. But in the meantime, Steve, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed it. That was great. And thanks to everyone for joining us.
Thanks so much, everyone.